Thanks for having me on.
It's a great honor, sir. All right, let's start with ActBlue. There was a lot of work over the summer. You didn't take a day off. Everyone was working hard. We've got subpoenas. We've got some testimony. Get us up to speed on the cooperation you're getting and not getting from ActBlue's executives.
Well, we have issued a series of subpoenas trying to get to the bottom of exactly what is going on as it relates to the financial security protocols that should be in place for any form of online giving, donation, or even buying. When we began this investigation a little over 2 years ago, we recognized that ActBlue did not have the security protocols in place that they should have. Simple things like having that 3 or 4 digit code on the back of your credit card, a CVV number, being required to be entered when making a donation. When we began this investigation, they didn't even require that. So we've begun to further this investigation. We've subpoenaed a series of executives at ActBlue to come and testify to make sure we understand why they lack these security protocols. Some of those individuals have come in, some have not. We're currently not in a position to be able to publicly release all the information, but let me say, we still have a lot of questions about what has been going on at ActBlue. And I'm committed, along now with the chairman of Oversight, James Comer, and Jim Jordan at Judiciary, to get to the bottom of this for the American people.
Important.
And Mr. Chairman, I know you still have a lot of questions, but they still have a lot of work to do as far as cleaning things up. The CCV thing is great, but as I understand it, there are a lot of other security measures that they need to employ. Do you anticipate that they will, well, first of all, are they still operating even with these security measures that are not in place?
They are still operating. It's online donation platforms like ActBlue that cause a lot of concern about how money is flowing into the U.S. political system. At an absolute minimum, Americans should be able to be confident that no foreign funds are flowing into U.S. elections. What I would like to see is protocols change. Some of this is going to require legislation passing the House and the Senate and being signed into law. Just before last election, we put forward legislation that would have made substantive changes to prevent abuses that could be done at places like ActBlue. We were successful ultimately at getting that through the House, but the Senate, under then the leadership on the Democratic side, refused to move forward. I think we have a huge opportunity here on the legislative side to put fixes in place to prevent abuse so that these types of abuses that we're concerned about will never happen in the future.
Yeah, so very important. You've also done such enormous work to improve the integrity of our systems and make it easier to vote, harder to cheat. Over the last few days, the president has weighed in saying, I'd like to get rid of mail-in ballots that aren't absentee ballots. So if you're not an absentee, you would get rid of mail-in ballots. Your thoughts on that and what other things you might be doing to secure the system on top of all the good work you've already done?
Well, I've been working to make sure that it's exactly as you said, John, easy to vote, hard to cheat. I think there's a few things that we should be able to get in place before the next election. One is making sure that we end what they call universal mail-in voting, which means if you're on the voter rolls, you get a live ballot, regardless of whether or not you've requested it. This is a real problem in jurisdictions that don't clean up their voter rolls. That's very true even in our nation's capital in Washington, D.C., where they've done an abysmal job of cleaning up the voter rolls, but then mail out a live ballot to everyone on those voter rolls, even though they're not cleaned up. That's a problem. The other is we should make sure that ballots are in by the time the elections close. This is where California has a real problem. I went to LA County, to Central County in California, 2 days after the last presidential election. And what I saw was concerning. It was a vast number of ballots still arriving. And when you don't have results for the American people on election night, as say the state of Florida does, what it does is reduces Americans' confidence in our elections. And what we have seen time and again is as Americans have more confidence in their elections, they're actually much more likely to participate, and participation is a good thing. And so getting ballots in by the time the polls close, I think, is an obvious reform that should be put in place. And we should not be mailing ballots to people that don't request them. That is a significant concern, in particular in jurisdictions that are not maintaining their voter rolls in the first place.
Right.
Huge.
Yeah. Wasn't it amazing how that popular vote margin got ever so skinnier as the days went on after the election last year? Sir, I want to ask you about what states like Florida are doing. What is preventing states like California from doing it? Is it a matter of being able, or is it a matter of being willing?
It's a matter of being willing. Every state could put in place the protocols that we know that work. Last Congress, we introduced legislation that put forward a gold standard about how states should operate. We'll be reintroducing legislation in the weeks ahead. putting forward that gold standard for states about how you should be operating and running your elections, and putting in enforcement mechanisms for states that fail to meet a high standard. The obvious standard that I think should be the most obvious is that ballots need to be in by the time the polls close, with the sole exception we can have a discussion about active duty overseas military. Separate of that, everybody should be able to have their ballot in by the time the polls are closed. It's no different than when you were in high school and a paper was due at any given time. When did you do it? Just before it was due. The state of Florida gets their ballots in by the time the polls close. The state of Wisconsin does. States like California, more or less, seem to be encouraging people to come in at the final hour because they allow those ballots to arrive after the polls close. Again, that doesn't instill confidence in our elections. What it does is weakens it. That's not a good thing. What we want is Americans to have strong conviction and strong belief that the election system works, and we know what protocols and procedures we need to have in place. We just need the willingness of states to step up and do it, or we need the federal government to come in and force those states to get their elections into gear.
Yeah, so important. Sir, you have overseen also a large part of what goes on in Washington, D.C., whether it's elections or otherwise. The Justice Department announced over the weekend that it is open to criminal investigation into allegations that D.C. police were manipulating crime data, creating sort of a false portrait of security in the city. Your thoughts on what's happened over the last 2 weeks with President Trump sending out the National Guard, federal police, crime going down, murders going down, and now maybe the possibility that we were getting a false picture of what the crime stats really were?
Well, as chairman of the Committee on Administration, we've been at the forefront of making sure that we keep visitors, staff, and members safe on Capitol Hill. And so I've dug into this situation about what's playing out in Washington, D.C., holding a series of hearings and roundtables, including with the union leadership of the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department. But what we're seeing in Washington, D.C. is really a reflection of what we see in liberal cities across the country, in particular following the summer of 2020, is cities and elected leaders failed to stand with the men and women of law enforcement. What we saw was a rising crime in our nation's largest city. What you need to do is stand with the men and women of law enforcement and then enforce the crimes and the laws that are on the books and put bad people away. The unwillingness of some of our nation's largest cities to do this have made them unsafe. And so what we've had to do is step in and make sure that we're putting the rules of the road in place to make sure that everyone feels safe in their homes. Absolutely every American has a right to feel safe in their homes. And what we need to do is put in place the rules and regulations in our nation's largest, bluest cities to make sure that we're reinstating public safety after an absolute deterioration following, in particular, the summer of 2020, when far too many Democrats turned their backs on our nation's police departments. And we're still dealing with the consequences of those horrific decisions by our nation's bluest cities.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, before we let you go, this is obviously a politically blue city, but I think that the men and women who wear blue are a little bit more evenly split. But when it comes to President Trump and his actions here in D.C., the downgrading or the decrease in crimes, do you get the sense that most of the law enforcement here in Washington support the president? I know the union does.
I think the men and women of law enforcement across the board support conservatives who have their backs. I think they're sick and tired of liberal elected leaders not having their backs when they're out doing incredibly difficult work. You got to remember, when these law enforcement officers wake up, put the badge over their heart, and walk out the door, they have sworn to answer the call, not knowing what call is going to come across the radio on any given day. I can't imagine how difficult that job would become when they would know elected leaders don't have their backs. What we need to do is make sure that we show we have the backs of law enforcement, and President Trump clearly has the backs of law enforcement, and I would assume that he has the overwhelming support of the men and women of law enforcement in Washington, D.C., but in cities all across the United States who are clamoring for elected leaders to stand up, be tough on crime, reestablish public safety. And we have an opportunity to do that with President Trump at the White House and with a recognition across the country that some of our nation's largest cities are not a place where people currently are feeling safe.
Yeah, that is for sure. Mr. Chairman, it's always a great honor. We always get a great update from you. Lots of news always. Thanks for joining us today. Have a good rest of your summer. We'll see you soon back in Washington.
Thanks for having me on.